And sometimes when we spend so much time going through a subject, we can kind of maybe lose track of where we started. And so I'm going to go back and just hit some of the high points, some of the main verses we've been covering and string them together and see the direction that this is going and where we're planning on ending up. We're coming close to the end of this. It's been a lot of preface work, laying the foundation for Satan's methods and the means by which he uses to make his message, his purpose appealing to us. And we're going to get into some specifics. I planned on it this week, but I think we may actually end up doing most of this next week, since I want to kind of review and bring this up to date on what we've looked at so far, as well as throw in a couple of new things here. And then we'll start looking at specific areas where Satan seems, in my mind, to clearly influence Christian theology, biblical theology that impacts our understanding and creates misunderstanding towards the Christian life in particular. And so looking back at First Kings, we have this story concerning Ahab in 1 Kings chapter 22. We're not going to go over in great detail. Like I said, this is mostly review. So I want to cover a number of scriptures and see how these seem to string together as it relates to this subject. In 1 Kings chapter 22, starting in verse 12, we have this historical account of Jeroboam, who is the king of Judah, and Ahab, who is the king of Israel. The nation has been split, and there has been some things going on that Ahab is trying to rectify. There was a contract made between Ahab and I think it was Syria, the nation of Aram, I believe, in the Old Testament, the nation of Aram, not this Aram. And some of the conditions of that contract or covenant was that certain cities would be deeded back over to Israel, and that wasn't completed. We see that in chapter 18. Ramoth Gilead was never brought over. Apparently, it was part. It seems from the context, it appears like that was part of the contract. And so Ahab has decided to try to take it by force. He's contracted with Jeroboam to unite the armies of Israel and Judah together to fight the Syrian army and take Ramoth Gilead back. And after he's decided to do this, this is one thing that's important for us to get from this, is because, you know, things that are written before are written for our learning. We get illustrations of what we're not supposed to do from what we see that many people did in the Old Testament. And one of the things we can learn from this is what not to do is make a determination of what we're going to do and then go to God and seek his blessing for it. And you see that all the time in Christian circles. People make a decision and then they ask God to bless them in their deed. But it's after they've already made the decision of what they're going to do. It's before they've ever made given any thought as to whether it's really God's will for this to occur or not. And that's exactly what Ahab has done. And so in 1 Kings chapter 22, verse 12, says, all the prophets were prophesying thus, saying, go up to Ramoth Gilead and prosper, for the Lord will give it to the hand of the king. So now these prophets, back in chapter 18, Elijah had killed 400 of the prophets. There was about 750 prophets altogether. There were prophets of Jezebel and of Ahab. There was 400 prophets of Baal, and there's 350 prophets of Asherah, who was a female deity. Baal was a male deity, so there's prophets for different deities. And Elijah is said to have killed the 400 prophets of Baal. but there's nothing said about whether he killed the prophets of Asherah or not. Now, this event in chapter 22 is 3 years after what happens in chapter 18. And these prophets now, they're either the 350 prophets that were not killed by Elijah in chapter 18, or after a period of 3 years, there have been more prophets recruited, raised up, or whatever, false prophets that are now serving in the place of the 400. Either way, it's clear that these prophets that are mentioned here are false prophets. And we're going to get information as to where they get their prophecy from in the coming verses.